Hey guys, welcome to my live stream. There is so many things that I'd like to talk about and that I'd like to go over. Not really sure where to start, but you got to start somewhere. So here we are. I'm a little frazzled. I received a pretty hard email today. As a little backstory, if you haven't watched my previous videos, I've been pretty heavily involved in advocating for children who have been abused in the last couple of years. And the amount of research I've done pertaining to child abuse, psychology, law, our legal system, just all kinds of variants that relate to this issue. And how much misinformation is out there. Got to start talking about it somewhere and bringing that information to you. This is extremely difficult for me, so please bear with me, and we're gonna get through this. So some of the first things I want to talk about is what the process of child abuse looks like in a world today. And I talk to women all the time across this country, in the United States, that have reported child abuse, usually on their children. And there are certain things that come up again and again and again. And there's really what we see is going on. And I go over quite a bit of it in my playbook video. If you want to, the quality's not great. I'll redo it again at some time. But what people need to understand is we have a whole system set up to protect abusers and to ensure that children who have been abused, that information never comes to light. And people who report abuse are silenced and disqualified and attacked in a lot of ways. And the children are left in harm's way. And the more you look into it, and the more you research, and the more you learn, the more scary the whole picture really kind of gets. But also, sometimes it's helpful to understand where this is all coming from, and you're not alone, and you're not the only one experiencing this, and it's actually kind of standard operating procedure. So today, I got an email. I've been fighting for my children. They were abused from the ages, my oldest at the time, 7 months, till just over 2. I had a 6-week-old baby at the time when he disclosed to me in a few words, once he hadn't lost, and some actions, what had been happening to him. It was pretty blatant, and I'm not going to get into that because it's quite graphic, and it really paints a picture. And I got him safe for a little while. But the problem is the abuser was also the father of the youngest son. And I ran, and we were safe for a little while, and then the courts kicked in. And for 2 years, I had my oldest son safe, and I was recording evidence and taking pictures, getting them to experts, when my youngest son would be returned to me in really bad shape, bringing him to the hospital and having him looked at. He was just a baby, so it's not like he can be interviewed or anything like that, but there are some pretty significant markers that relate to this that are unquestionable. If you're dealing with people that are either educated or not involved in human trafficking. And this is where it gets scary, because time and time again, I'm hearing these stories where police officers intentionally cover up evidence. Child protection officers ignore clear evidence. Either one, they're uneducated. And then you get into, and I read a lot when I left because I was trying to protect my children. And one of the first things I did is I downloaded a bunch of social worker documents on how to handle when you notice these things, and what to look for, and how you process something like this. And what I found time and time again was this information about how children are sexual beings, and to check to see if the children are attractive, because attractive children are easier to place and they have better rates of adoption. The information about children being sexual beings, and when you really start digging into it, a lot of these people that wrote the manual on what children's sexuality looks like were later found and convicted to be pedophiles. A lot of this documentation comes out of England. And you'd think that once these people were found to be pedophiles, that they would remove those learning documents from the social worker manuals, but they don't. So pedophiles write the standard on the sexuality of children. And this goes back as well to Alfred Kinsey, who I believe was in the 60s, dramatically changed the court system and how they deal with pedophilia. It's so unbelievable that if I were to tell you what these things say, and I'm going to get into it, without you actually going and doing your own research and looking into this yourself, you're going to have a hard time believing that this is possible. But he wrote things that, like, pedophiles don't reoffend once they've done prison time, which is absolutely untrue. It's the opposite of the truth. He was also running a program where it's propagated that it was historical information, but there's evidence that he was actually paying people to sexually abuse children with a stopwatch. And if you really dig into the documents, and I apologize, this is going to be quite disturbing, but I need you to understand what's going on. One of the, and there's about 200 plus children that they put into this research report. And one of the children was a 2-year-old girl, and they had wrote that this 2-year-old girl had had 24 orgasms in 24 hours. And their sign of an orgasm was screaming and crying, trying to pull away. There's something else. It's been a while since I looked at that material, and it's absolutely horrific. But this person that did this report also then traveled all around the United States, I don't even know, campaigning to have the justice system severely lower the rates of jail time given to pedophiles, as well as distribute information about rehabilitation and I forget what the word is, but when you reoffend. None of that's been overturned. This was in the 60s. You see all these reports right now where these pedophiles are getting little to no jail time, and things are overturned quickly, or they have hundreds of child porn images and they walk free that day and they don't even have to be put on the registry. And in the future, I plan to do more of a news type broadcast where we can pull up different articles and go over certain things. Right now, I had to start somewhere. There's so many things that need to be talked about. People don't understand the history of where this stuff is coming from. One of the biggest issues I have, not with the people who have actually been in this situation, But people who haven't been in this situation, haven't looked into it, they'll automatically believe that child protection is there to protect children. Makes sense, right? It's what we've been taught. It's not true. It's not true. There's so many parents, good parents, especially in the last little bit. The reasons that they're taking children away are just unreal. If you're a Christian and you want to raise your children in a religious fashion, if they say your child wants to be trans as a child, and you don't want to raise them that until they're of an older age where they can actually make that decision for themselves, take your children away. The reasons are endless, and there's supposed to be some sort of protection where they have to get a court order, that they shouldn't be able to just take them from you. And there's a lot of, what do you call that, case law, where they have acted improperly and they've had it. Now, you need money to fight this kind of stuff, but there's a lot of case law that says that it's not legal for them to do it. They do it, but it's not legal. They still do it all the time. There's a pretty famous case happening right now. I forget what the state is, but the child had a fever, and the SWAT team came in, took the children last minute over a fever that had gone down. There was a woman in Manitoba that had a baby taken from her. I believe she just got it back on suspicion of this, that, or the other. In Canada, especially, if you don't care yourself, then that's a reason for them to take your children. And this is where it gets ironic. So if you don't care yourself, so what they're doing is they're admitting that having children in care, it doesn't qualify as parenting. It doesn't make a safe, sound person. At least that's what they're claiming. So in its own reasoning, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. But that's enough to take your children. If you don't care, then we're going to come take your children now, because we didn't do a good enough job with you. So we're just going to... It's all BS. It really is. It's a reason to make money. And the more you look into it, they get tons of money for children. They get the child tax with babies in the COS, Children's Aid. They sell babies for $20,000. They don't do extensive background checks, and they also don't keep checking into the situation once they've sold them off. Adopted them. No, they're selling them. It's child trafficking. It's legalized, government-sanctioned child trafficking. They also, you rip children away from their parents. They're traumatized. So now they take them to therapists who, what's that word? Wow, I'm having a total brain freeze here. They take them to therapists who diagnose them as ADD, ADHD, all of these things, and they put them on all kinds of medication. And then the government gets extra money because they're disabled or they have a condition. And what we're finding time and time again is that there is no care. They get extra money so that they put the children in, extra classes, things that can support them, but they don't do it. They just fill them full of drugs to keep them quiet. And the kids are traumatized. And this is probably the hardest part, because one of the first things I started to do when I realized what was happening to my son is, how do I help him? What do I do? I don't know anything about the psychology of this. I know he wasn't doing well. I didn't know how to help him. I didn't know. I've never had children before. I'd never been around a lot of children. So I started researching like crazy and looking into the psychology of child abuse and what it does to them. And it makes them kind of neurotic and very angry. And they just need to get things out and need to feel safe to get better. And it's crazy because you could sit there and go through all of these psychology manuals that are put up by universities and understand how to help them. And then you talk to these children aid agencies and they don't have a clue. These are the people who are paid to assess a situation, and they don't have a clue what actually works. All they have a clue is how to construct a case against you to make money for the industry and how to protect pedophiles. They're very good at protecting pedophiles. So we have a legal system and a criminal system that is protecting pedophiles. We have a children's protection agency system that makes excuses for abusers, protects pedophiles, and makes money off of children. And then we have a court system, especially the family court system. All of these issues I'm going to break up into videos in the future where we can really get into it and talk about some of the laws and the legal things and really start to break things down. I just wanted to start somewhere with an idea of what we're going to be doing here in the future. I also plan to have on some women and do some interviews back and forth of what they've seen and what they've experienced and give you a real overview of the reality of things. But we have a legal system, especially the family court system, that isn't under the constitutions. The provinces are under acts. Therefore, they've assumed responsibility for various things, being the removal of children and child protection, which is in the Constitution. It's a federal issue. So they assume these responsibilities without accountability. So if they act improperly, they're not accountable. The federal government is. But there's no way to get recompense. There's no way to fix the issue unless you can afford thousands of dollars in a civil rights lawyer and a team of people that are ready to really take on these issues. I brought a 300-page motion report before the federal court detailing the abuse that I had seen in my children, the way the system handled it, doctor's notes, therapist letters. The amount of evidence I provided the court was insane, and the Attorney General called it vexatious. There was also 12 pictures, I believe, of abuse. It was blisters, ripped skin, redness, rashes, that kind of things that were included in it. These are the things I had been documenting. And the Attorney General of Canada literally called it pornographic. Pictures of a baby who had been abused in various places, being private areas that were showing abuses of pornographic to the Attorney General of Canada. This is how sick these people are. It's beyond. It's absolutely beyond your imagination. It's beyond what you think is possible. But it is what it is. And they've been operating this way for a very long time. And the family courts, you don't have rights. We were sold a long time ago. 1666, the SSVQ Trust, the Pope at the time put through this order stating that all property, all people, all land, all animals belong to him, belong to the Vatican. Hello, I'm back there. Sorry about this. There's some technical difficulties. We're through this, so there's some bugs to work out. But I was saying about the trust. So in this 1666, the Pope declared us all trust, and part of that was declaring that by the age of 7, all men man, woman, are lost at sea. That you're all lost at sea, never to be heard or found of again. And if you don't go through whatever paperwork is needed to declare life, to declare that you are on land and alive, you are owned by the Vatican and by your country. This is in the birth certificate as well. It's all in capital letters. That represents a corporation, not a live person. They started putting in last names because a last family name could be held as a corporate entity instead of the person. And person now even means corporation. And some of my background, I've always had a pretty strong distrust for systems and for what I was seeing. Even as a child, I grew up in a pretty hectic home. But I understood at a young age that something wasn't right in the world. Something wasn't okay. And I went to university for business, and the day in economics that they explained to us that a corporation was a legal entity upon itself, and that the decisions or actions that this corporation took, now it's the people within the corporation deciding, but if they're doing it under this banner of this corporation, it's what's held responsible, not the people actually making the decision. And I remember that day quite well. There was probably about 200 people in that class. And I read it, and we're going over it in class, and my mouth just dropped. Like, what? So you can, harm the environment. This is where my mind was at. This is back in 2003. You can harm the environment. You can, decide to do all these unnatural things, not good, and no one's responsible. A business is responsible. That was a wake-up call. I've had quite a few wake-up calls throughout the years. I think it just keeps getting a little steeper, a little steeper, a little steeper. But what really surprised me that day is, as we were reading over that and going over it in class, and I'm kind of cluing in, like, how is this even okay? Like, morally, responsibly, as a society, how have we allowed this to happen? And I remember, like, what? Like, questioning the teacher about it, like, how is this? And they kind of treated me like I was stupid. And I remember looking around the room, and there was all of these other students looking at me like, how dare you question? How dare you question the textbook? It's in the textbook. It must be true. And then here we are living in a society of non-critical thinkers, of educationalized folks that don't have any education. They don't have the ability to critically think about anything, and more often than not, they're so heavily programmed by everything they see around them. They don't have a clue what's really going on. And it breaks my heart. I'm thankful in one hand that I've had so many horrific experiences in my life that it keeps bringing me closer and closer to truth. And I'm thankful that I've had the opportunity, because I'm a really stubborn individual. And I know, even though I've searched out a lot of truths on my own, it's been these experiences in my life that just light a fire under me like nothing else could. So I'm really thankful for that. But I've got to that point where it's like, what good is it knowing all of these things? What good is it having all of this research when you can't even protect your own children? So here we are. And in the coming weeks, I'm going to do my best to bring as much of that information so maybe you could do what I couldn't, or I haven't been able to do thus far. Sorry. I'm looking around Canada today. I'm in Canada and I'm scared. I'm honestly scared. We just had this huge scandal, the SNC scandal, where we had this woman stand before the court. I don't know what kind of court it was. I apologize for my lack of research there, but clearly explain that she had been coerced to not pressing charges on a company that was criminal, that was acting criminally. She was pressured to walk away. This is all news. This isn't even hidden information. And within weeks, it's like business is normal. Does this not scare anybody else? We have a situation where 279 people were murdered by bombers because they went to church, and that same day, we have a man who murdered people, and then we gave him $10 million because he could afford those civil rights lawyers. We have him on TV, and we're clapping and cheering, and he murdered people. He murdered soldiers fighting for this country. And we're celebrating him on a day where hundreds of people are dying. I don't know what it's going to take. I don't know what it's going to take to wake up people to how bad it's gotten. Even me, like I said, I've always had this feeling of something not being right, and I've always been able to see into things a little bit better than other people could, but I got played. I got played by a psychopath pedophile. They're very good at what they do. They're very good manipulators. They're very good at projecting a certain image. Because their entire life is constructed around appearances. And the reality is they fit right into society, because 90% of society today is about constructing appearances. It's not about who you are in your heart. It's not about what you care for. It's about who you can appear to be. We're in trouble. If people don't start waking up, like we talk about history, say for example, like Hitler and the Nazis, and how children were just taken from families, and we look back on that like, oh, horrible. Or here in Canada, the residential schools, and there's a huge push right now to divide the Native community and the other communities. They just gave Children's Aid Society gave the funding for Native Indigenous children to the local bands. They had to get all that money away. Sorry, my nose is dripping a little bit from getting upset. They had to give that money away. And if you know about the rates of children who are being taken, say from Toronto, for example, 80% of them are Black. So whenever the Native communities, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's not what I'm saying here. But there's a clear, instead of addressing the fact that children are dying in care, children are being abused, all children, they're saying, oh no, it's just the Native kids, or it's just this. No, it's your system as a whole. But we look at the residential schools, and these children were taken, and they were abused, and their culture was taken away from them. And yet we have a prime minister saying we don't have a culture in Canada. There's no culture here. Except all the kids are being abused. even the ones who end up in decent homes, the trauma from being ripped away. And yes, I understand there are situations where children need to be protected, but I like explain this in a group of other people too. I lived on the reserve for some time, and my mom was a drinker. I was about 15 at the time, and this family took me in. There was no CLS, there was no outside. They gave me a bed. I went to school. They looked after me, and that was it. You know, there was another kid that lived around there, and his family was drinking too. His house was pretty unstable, so same thing. He slept there. He ate there. He went to school from there. There wasn't the need of all of these outside agencies to manage everything. And I did great. I actually got into university because they had put me up, and I actually went to school, and there wasn't this whole judgment-based, you're doing all the wrong things, and they actually cared. There was a sense of community there that wasn't in, you know, not on the reserve. And that I've always held in my heart is that sense of community and that responsibility that this family took. They had quite a few children themselves, so it wasn't such a huge deal. But any extra child definitely adds up. And for them to just take me in like that. So when you look at the world as a whole and you start having people, well, who's going to look after the children? A lot of these cases are constructed. They take the children and then they, you know, send you to their therapists. They send you to their people who make false statements about you. These social workers, and this isn't new news. You know, there's tons of reports of them being charged in courts for lying on court documents, lying under oath. This is standard operating procedure. This article just came out the other day in BC where most of them aren't accredited social workers either. They're not part of like how they all have accreditations that are supposed to govern over them. The majority of social workers, they don't have to sign up for that. There's no, again, oversight, no accountability, no nothing. But this organization that oversees put out that they want to open up the profession of social workers to those who mastered in criminology as well as psychology, which is great. Those were the two things that were missing from the social workers in my position that we're doing is the lack of any understanding of the criminal system, of what criminals look like, the profiles, also psychology. What children who are being sexually abused actually look like, because they're trained, you know, children are sexual beings. And it's one thing to play sexual games. Children touch, they explore. It's another thing to hide in a closet and to coax other children in or display behaviors that just aren't normal, that clearly show foreknowledge. They don't put things in their orifices. They don't do that to explore. And social workers just make excuses. They just say, oh, that's normal. That's normal behavior. Number one, they don't have a fucking clue. Pardon my language. They're either not educated or they know exactly what they're doing. My point was we have this division happening where these agencies are not being held accountable and they're dividing populations, and like the residential schools and what happened there, it never stopped. It never ended. Just because we're not, you know, the foster homes, a lot of them aren't any better. The group homes aren't even close to being any better. It's not a priest molesting them anymore. It's human traffickers that find these group homes and traffic them on the weekends and drop them off on a Monday. This sounds crazy. It's happening. It's happening all over the place. I read somewhere that at the beginning of Canada and the US, their child protection was the wheat boom, when we had the big rush of people coming over and they had a lot of wheat fields that they needed worked. What they did was they took children from England, Ireland, Scotland, in that area, and brought them here and put them on the farms as workers, slaves, you could call them. That was their start. That's the organization, and they went from being farm slaves to being paycheck slaves. My cousin, when she was 14, she was in a foster home, and she called me really upset because this house had 3 or 4 Great Danes that they had put her in, and the family had her washing the dishes every day, vacuuming the rugs. They didn't really care about her. They were using her as a slave. I took her in. I've been a foster parent in a lot of ways. I was in foster care for a couple weeks when I was 13 because some stuff that was going on with my dad. I've seen this from every single angle. And the first house I was in, it wasn't that bad. She was more preoccupied. Single mother, had a teenage daughter, and also took in drug-addicted babies. So there was no attention there. It was just like, here's your bed. And it's like a bunk, you know, and I was even in a nice house, but it's not for you. It's not a place for you. You're just staying here and go to school and do what's expected of you, but nobody's really sitting down and asking you how you feel or how you're doing or what you need. And after a week there, they moved me to where my sister was, and this was more typical of a foster home. This was a family who was doing foster care to make money. And they had a huge house, and they had a section of the house just for the foster kids. And it was unfinished. And it was in rough shape, and the kids had put holes in the walls, and it was just not welcoming at all. And when it was dinner time, they had 2 different kitchens. They had the foster care kitchen, you know, where you'd sit at the table where you would have like hot dogs and craft dinner. And then they had their family kitchen. And that was just off to the side in a room where beautiful cabinets, you know, dark oak table, and they're eating steak and this and that, and you don't even sit with them. Like this is okay to your foster system. This is okay to your social workers. This is what's happening to children. That's not even the worst of the worst. My cousin, male cousin, when we were kids growing up, his father died when they were fairly young. He was an alcoholic, and the mother wasn't able to care for them, and my family wasn't able to take them in. And they got put with a super religious house. And they literally worked the children as slaves, cutting wood. And there was 2 brothers, and one was a lot worse than the other. He acted out a lot worse, and they just got rid of that one. We don't want this one. And they kept the one that would be a slave and not make up too much fuss about it. And in my early 20s, he was quite a bit, not too terribly older than me, but quite a bit older than me. He had started to have some real issues with mental health, and he was hearing voices, and he was living out in the woods in a tent with a bunch of machetes. He never really talked about what happened to him there, but I can guarantee you it wasn't pretty. His brother ended up a lot worse. He's very psychotic, and he actually went into the military, and they trained him and fed him until he got either kicked out or quit that and ended up as a drug addict on the streets, but really not a safe individual to be around. This is our Child Protection Agency. This is who's protecting our children. So I took my cousin in, and I helped her. I was kind of hard on her, but at the same time, she was behaving very dangerously at a very scary part of her life. There was a lot of stuff going on, and she had never had structure. Her mother wasn't great, and that was the father who had passed away. She was just a baby, different mother. So she never really knew him, and her mother, I think, was bipolar, and the house was always messy. There's lots of stepdads and that, so she never had structure. But when she came to live with me, there was, she had her freedom, but I was also a little hard on her because I knew where this was going. And as far as I know, I haven't talked to her in a little bit, but she had a couple kids of her own, and she found a nice man who had a couple teenage kids, and they've made a family together, and she understands that she needs that little bit more support and parenting. And I'm happy that she has that self-awareness, and it's not from a place of insecurity, but to keep herself safe and to be able to grow up, even though she's already grown up, but because of the lack of guidance throughout her life, that's something she needed. But I don't think she would have made those decisions if she hadn't spent that time with me. So here we are. They want to adopt out my son. Foster to adopt. They want me to provide a bunch of pictures for him, and he's going to be 5, and it's been since October 30th, and he misses us. This is his therapist, the one who's trying to help him and advocate for him. What a joke. The one working with the criminal, corrupt ministry that will say whatever they want to say, that will write lies on court documents and testify under oath. There's no morality here. Either their IQs are so low they don't understand what morality means, or, they're just criminally complicit in a system about making money. We need to come together as people. We need to start protecting those who can't protect themselves. We need to start reaching out and not, there's so much blame and so much, when you hear about somebody losing their kids, and me included, before I went through this, I heard about somebody losing their kids. In my mind, oh, well, what did you do? How did you deserve it? Or you see mothers that are, obviously now it's after the fact, and they're struggling, and they're doing drugs, and they're drinking. It isn't until you've had it happen to you that you realize how painful. And it's no surprise that they end up on drugs or drinking and trying to escape this reality. So one of the worst things you could do to a person is take their children away from you. We think about war, and we think about atrocities that go on, and I can't imagine being a mother and watching people abuse your children and not being able to do anything about it. And yet our governments are doing it every single day. And here we are talking about this war over here, this war over there, and what's happening. And we're not seeing what's going on around us. There is hope. There is hope. But we need to get involved. We need to get involved, and we need to start supporting the people going through these things, and we need to back them up, and we need to financially support them, because these abusers, they come from families usually with money, or they come from families with abusive past. So these abusers usually were abused. So it's a big family secret. So even if the abuser doesn't have money, usually the family will fork out money to keep the family secret safe. Because it's all about appearances, right? It's all about what we look like, not who we are. there's so many more things I want to say. This is just the start. It's just opening the door. I hope you'll join me here. And if there's any suggestions or things that you want to talk to pertaining to these issues, and we'll go over all kinds of things in the days to come, just leave a comment. I'll go through it. Thanks for listening. Share it. And have a good evening.